Good morning and welcome to EPG Pathshala. We are looking at English literature from 1590 to 1798, and today we will be considering the poetry of William Shakespeare with specific reference to the Rape of Lucrece. I am Anna Kurian and I teach at the Department of English in the University of Hyderabad. Now, a brief introduction to William Shakespeare before we proceed to looking at his poetry. Now, Shakespeare, popularly called the Bard of Avon, is primarily known as a playwright, but he did also write some non-dramatic poetry, and it is that we're concerned with today. Now, Shakespeare was born, or it is held that he was born on April 23rd. We have a baptismal notation for him, a record for his baptism, but not a record of his birth. So we usually believe that he was born on April 23rd, 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon in England, and that is why he's called the Bard of Avon. So Shakespeare wrote several plays in various genres, and so we have histories such as the three parts of Henry VI, but also Richard II, Richard III. We have Henry V, Henry IV in two parts, and so on and so forth. We also have comedies, and there are a range of comedies from the early ones, such as the Comedy of Errors or the Taming of the Shrew, via the later ones, which included the four big ones that he wrote, Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, and so on and so forth, through to the tragedies, where you have the four major ones, Macbeth, Othello, Hamlet, and King Lear, but also earlier ones such as Titus Andronicus and Romeo and Juliet, and later ones such as Coriolanus and Antony and Cleopatra. Towards the conclusion of his career, Shakespeare moved away from these genres and instead wrote romances such as The Tempest, Cymbeline, A Winter's Tale, and so on and so forth. But, and this is something that we have been saying several times over, he and his contemporaries did not believe that playwriting was the way to lasting fame. Literary genius was supposed to be in writing poetry, not in writing plays. Plays were entertainment, poetry was long-lasting literary value. So they looked to poetry for their lasting fame. And Shakespeare's initial work in poetry were two long poems, Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece, which were both dedicated to Henry Wriothesley, who was an earl. And he wrote these in iambic pentameter, and they were in the early 1590s that he wrote these two poems. In addition to the longer poems, Shakespeare also wrote a large number of sonnets, 154 to be exact. And so before we proceed to looking at the Rape of Lucrece, we shall be looking at the sonnets of Shakespeare. Very briefly, an introduction to the sonnet form as well. And the term sonnet itself can be traced back to the Italian word sonetto, meaning sound or strain. And it comes to England during the 17th century at the peak of the English Renaissance. And it is brought to England by people such as Surrey. And the birth of sonnets is credited to the Italian sonneteer Lentini, but it was popularized by Petrarch. And he also gave us, in addition to the form, which is called the Petrarchan sonnet, it is divided into two sections, the octave and the sestet. He also gave us a certain idea as to how the sonnet form works, that these are sonnets which are written to one lady love, and therefore then they chronicle, if you will, the history of a passion. Now it comes to England with Wyatt and Surrey, and the Earl of Surrey and Sir Thomas Wyatt, and they give us a variant on the Petrarchan form of the sonnet. Now the Petrarchan form, as already mentioned, was in an octave and a sestet with a very specific rhyme scheme. Now the Petrarchan sonnet, when it is adapted into English, becomes what is usually called either the English sonnet or the Shakespearean sonnet after its greatest practitioner. And this then is in a different form. Now Shakespeare's sonnets did not follow this octave sestet pattern. Instead, they were in three quatrains with a concluding couplet. So three stanzas of 4 lines each, and then a concluding couplet, which could be rhymed and was usually rhymed. So the rhyme scheme also is specific to this. So you had A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and then G, G, which was the rhyming couplet at the end of the Shakespearean sonnet or the English sonnet. Now, varying themes, anything and everything could be a theme for a sonnet, but usually to do with love in some form or the other, whether for friendship or a romantic love between a man and a woman, or as in Shakespeare's case, very strong love which could be friendship, which might have been something else, but which then he sustains through a number of his sonnets. Usually the sonnet would give you a problem in the initial sections, whether it was quatrains or the octave, and in the sestet that problem would be resolved, or in the final couplet that problem would be resolved. That is how a sonnet structure works. Now, Shakespeare's sonnets were all dedicated to this mysterious person, W.H. Nobody has ever solved the puzzle of who this W.H. was. Various people are given as maybe the owners of those initials, including, of course, Henry Wriothesley, to whom Rape of Lucrece and Venus and Adonis were dedicated. They say that maybe he inverted the initials, so instead of H.W., he made a W.H. and he wrote it to him. Now, the first 126 sonnets are dedicated to W.H., and the themes are about unrequited love, maybe forbidden love, which is why there is always this kind of gay slant to Shakespeare's sonnets, that he was writing to a young man in praise of his beauty and he sounds enamored of him. So, was Shakespeare gay is, of course, the question that is asked. Now, the remaining sonnets are to a dark lady, and this dark lady is seen as somebody who is both attractive and not so, as in there is a note which is almost annoyed, angry, acidulous, whatever you want to call it, regarding the dark lady, because the dark lady seduces and deprives the speaker of the love and friendship of the young man whom he has been addressing earlier. There is also, of course, the problem whether these were autobiographical or not, which is where the Shakespeare is gay question comes from. The sonnets need not have been autobiographical, need not be considered autobiographical, but through the centuries it has been popularly believed, alongside somebody like Wordsworth, who said that with this key he unlocked his heart. So therefore then these poems are usually seen as being autobiographical, that they are about Shakespeare's own love story, whether it is with relation to the young man or to the dark lady. They are usually admired for, of course, the imagery that they possess, but also for the writing, which is supposed to be impeccable, but also for the themes that he explores and for the emotion that is visible in this style of poetry. Now, the division of the Shakespearean sonnets, 154 in number, is usually seen in the following way. The first 17 are seen as procreation sonnets, wherein he recommends to this young man whom he admires enormously and whom he sees as unparalleled in his beauty and his attractiveness. He urges him to get married because he says such beauty should not go without a copy to the grave. So get married, have lots of kids, so that then your beauty will be preserved in the lives of the children whom you will leave behind. Because, of course, all life ends in death. And so themes of mortality are explored alongside themes of procreation. And they are given to us as procreation as the counter to mortality and eventual death of all human beings. Because death will rob everybody of both youth as well as beauty. So therefore then have lots of kids so that your beauty and your youth last forever. Then the remainder from these, are up till about sonnet 126, are the fair youth sonnets. Now the fair youth, or the young man to whom he is speaking, these sonnets are all sonnets of praise. And he speaks about how he is, of course, completely infatuated with this young man, and he draws upon various images and speaks about how, therefore, then his love will last forever. And most famously, you have poems such as "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" or "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment," wherein he also talks about, especially in the first one, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" which ends with the idea that the poetry that he is writing will ensure immortality for the young man. "So long lives this, and this gives life to thee," is how he ends the poem, that in the poem that he is writing, the life of the young man will be perpetuated for all eternity. But there are other themes as well, but all the themes are to do with the love that he feels for this young man and the beauty of the young man, which he believes ought to be revered in perpetuity. And therefore then his verse is what will make that possible. The final bunch of sonnets, usually divided again into 227 to 152 are the Dark Lady sonnets. And there is this interesting kind of tension, because even as he seems to be attracted to the Dark Lady, he also is angry with himself because he is attracted to the Dark Lady. And he also sees the Dark Lady as not being conventionally beautiful and conventionally attractive, but rather as somebody who is not within the conventional mode of the beautiful and yet is very attractive. They're also, of course, notorious because they're fairly explicit in terms of their content. And then you have the last two sonnets, which are both on Cupid, the little love god of the Greeks. Now, Shakespeare's sonnets then give you a range of ideas, a range of characters, and a range of course, images and metaphors which he draws from various places. And he integrates them all into this sonnet sequence of 154 sonnets, which are usually read as being about love. Now, in addition to the sonnets, there are the two longer poems, one of which we will be doing in some detail. One of the things to be noted about the longer poems is that he treats his characters with impartiality, whether it is Venus and Adonis or whether it is Lucrece and Tarquin. He gives them all more or less equal space. He treats them with a fair degree of impartiality. Right, so the Rape of Lucrece. It is a classical idea that is given to us, a classical theme as well as a classical story. Now, the literature of 16th century in England is one which draws heavily upon the classics. Not just Shakespeare, but many of his literary comrades, all of them drew upon stories as well as themes from the classics, from Greek and Latin literature. And Shakespeare in this text continues this tradition. Now, Greek and Latin times was seen as the highest point of human endeavor. So when English men and women drew upon those texts and echoed those ideas, they were then also standing in line to achieve this greatness that Greek and Latin literature had achieved. Now, the Rape of Lucrece is the second of the two long narrative poems which have been attributed to William Shakespeare. And into this, what he speaks about is the establishment of the Roman Empire, except that he stops the poem just short of the establishment of the Roman Republic. Now, the story is first told for us by Titus Livius, and we are given the story of the Rape of Lucrece as being instrumental in the creation of the Roman Republic, which until then was under the rule of the Tarquins. And this, alongside another poem, Fasti by Ovid, are the primary documents which were used by Shakespeare to build this poem. Now, initially we are introduced to Lucrece as the fair love, Lucrece the chaste, the wife of Collatine. Now, Collatine is a Roman noble, and he is the one. We are not initially shown Lucrece. What we are shown is Lucrece as she is talked about by her husband. And the setting for this is something which actually is used much later. Now, this was written in the 1590s, but in Cymbeline, which is written in the late 1510s, Shakespeare uses the 1610s. Shakespeare uses the same kind of device wherein he has a bunch of men who are sitting together talking about whose wife is more chaste, whose wife is more beautiful, who is to be more envied in the possession of his wife. So you have the same kind of structure. So you have Collatine as well as all the other nobles of Rome, and you have Tarquin, who is the emperor of Rome, and his son, who is the villain of this story that we are talking about, all of them sitting together, and then they tell the stories about their wives. And Collatine is able to convince everybody that Lucrece is not just the most beautiful, but also the most noble in character amongst all their wives. And listening to the descriptions of Lucrece, Tarquin, the younger Tarquin, is then possessed, consumed by this desire that he must have her. And this also then introduces to us the idea that one person's personal pleasure is seen as ruling him and leading to the destruction of an entire social system. So Tarquin, the younger, the son of the ruler, is so possessed by lust for Lucrece that he jeopardizes the kingdom itself. The Roman Empire falls prey to his lust. It's not just Lucrece whose life is destroyed, which is bad enough, but that the entire system of Rome comes to a halt because of what he did. He is, of course, overcome with admiration on listening to these stories, and he decides that, okay, he's going to pay her a visit. So he pays her a visit. And she is, of course, alone at home, as in with lots of servants, because she's a noble woman and all of that. But there is no husband, there is no father, there is nobody else around. There, no protecting male is there. And as a result, Tarquin then, when he arrives in their house, Collatine and Lucrece's house, he is entertained on a noble scale by Lucrece. She gives him a very good welcome, she treats him well, she feeds him dinner and so on and so forth. And she, of course, thinks of him as her princely guest. He sees her as prey to his lust. And she listens to him, they talk about her husband, and she's fairly happy about this whole thing. Right? So when they break after dinner, she goes off to bed. Tarquin also, of course, goes off to bed. And this is where you have the introduction of the conflict, because the conflict is not necessarily at this point in terms of external conflicts, but the internal conflict, where Tarquin then has to decide what exactly is he going to do. He has come to Collatine's house, he has seen her, and he is now consumed by lust. He also realizes that all that Collatine said of her was small praise in comparison to her in real life, where she is seen to be much more beautiful and much more noble than what her husband described her as. So then you have the conflict described in considerable detail by Shakespeare, where he tells us about how he wants to go to Lucrece, he wants to possess her physically, but also he realizes the consequences that will attend upon it if he does so. He realizes that one, of course, he will then be decried, he will be seen as infamous, he will be the villain of the entire story. He also believes that the gods to whom he prays will all be mad at him, and that they will then punish him, and punish him hugely if he were to go and do something to Lucrece. But at the same time, he goes on and on about how he is consumed by lust, that if he doesn't possess her, he will not be able to live, and so on and so forth. Eventually, of course, lust wins. Otherwise, it would not be the rape of Lucrece. So he enters her bedchamber. She cries out with fright. She refuses to believe that he would do something like this. And he then accuses her of being the fault for her own destruction. As he says, if you had not been so beautiful, this would not have come upon you. If you had not been so chaste, this would not have happened. So he accuses her then of being the cause of her own doom and her own destruction. And he then tells her that it's either submit to his lust, or he has a threat also in place, because he says if she does not submit to his lust, what he plans to do is he will kill her, and he will kill a servant and say that he came upon them having an affair, having sex, and therefore then, because she was doing something that was so lacking in nobility, he was angry about a Roman woman behaving in such a way, and therefore he killed her. So what he threatens her with is the loss of her honor and her reputation, and that loss is not just in terms of her adultery, but also in terms of who she was committing adultery with, a common servant. So there is class interspersed with the idea of the woman's honor also, that a woman loses an honor far more if she is involved with somebody of a lower class, a servant man, rather than somebody of a higher class. So this is the threat that he holds out. He says that you will lose your entire reputation along with your life if you do not submit to my passion. Of course, she doesn't have a choice. She weeps and cries and so on and so forth. But Tarquin is deaf, and he proceeds to rape her. After the rape, he walks away. He has gained what he wanted, and he leaves. But Lucrece now has to find a way out of this problem that she has. And her first impulse, of course, is to commit suicide. But then she realizes that in doing so, she would then be leaving the crime that has been visited upon her unavenged. So she decides then that Tarquin has to be exposed, that this mask of innocence that he will wear in the world, that is not going to last. So she is going to then tell the world about how wicked he is. She writes a letter which she sends off to her father and to her husband, and she says that they should come at once back home so that they can meet her. The story proceeds. After this, we have the father and the husband both return. But in the meantime, you have Lucrece, who sits she's devastated. Her life has been destroyed for her. Her children have been threatened with the loss of reputation of their mother. And she's completely devastated. She sits and looks at a picture of the fall of Troy, and she sees herself as in some way like the Trojan king Priam, whose life is destroyed because of people who commits evil against him. So she sits there and she meditates upon it, and this forms a fairly long section of the Rape of Lucrece, because when she looks at the fall of the civilization of Troy, we are also being told that the fall of a system of Rome is now imminent because of what has been done to her. So once her father and her husband arrive over there, she tells them that all that has happened the night before. They are, of course, equally devastated, but they are also full of love for her. She tells the story to them without naming a name. And finally, when they ask her who is responsible for what has happened to her, she names Tarquin, and in the same breath, she kills herself. She stabs herself to death. Now, her husband and her father have brought with them some of the other noble men of Rome, and in this is somebody called Junius Brutus, who then is supposed to be a powerful orator. They, of course, all rise up with a single purpose, that they will take revenge upon what has been done to her and to the family. Her body bleeding profusely, and there is one of these really interesting side notes to this, that she bleeds red, which is her pure blood, and then she bleeds black, which is the impure blood which has become impure because of what Tarquin has done to her. So this bleeding body is then carried through Rome so that everybody can see and know what exactly the Tarquins are responsible for. So with that, the poem ends, and we are told that because of this, the Roman Republic is established, the Tarquins are banished from Rome, never again to return, and the Roman Empire is established. So the Rape of Lucrece is the story of an individual whose defilement and whose destruction leads to the destruction of a system of governance and the change of a city's ruling system into something else. So the individual, as he or she contributes to the history of a country or a city, is what we are being told about. Now, briefly then, a critical analysis of the Rape of Lucrece, and the mood, of course, is on the whole haunting, ominous and bleak, also because a lot of this is set at night. The entire Rape of Lucrece takes place after nightfall. Tarquin arrives, they have dinner, then his meditation in his chamber, the beauty of the sleeping Lucrece, all of this is at night, and night is eminently the time when evil reigns. So the poem is then given to us as this kind of bleak, haunting background. Also, we are given opposing figures as kinsmen and as rulers, and we are also told that the kind of betrayal that takes place is far worse because they were kinsmen. The Tarquin, Collatine, her father, all of them are related. The nobility of Rome is related to each other, and therefore then far worse. So you have a mood which is one of betrayal, which is one of dire doom, which is one of darkness, and that mood pervades the poem. It also becomes far worse once the rape has occurred, because Lucrece can see no life for herself. She does not believe in being a survivor, a rape survivor. She believes that by losing her chastity and by having been raped by Tarquin, her life is effectively over. And so what we see is that there is no possibility of Lucrece then ever surviving that rape. She kills herself because she believes that her honor has been forever lost. We come to the characterization, and as mentioned earlier, Shakespeare does this kind of very impartial, nuanced treatment of the characters. The characters are, of course, lifelike. If we want to go with the Johnson dictum, then Samuel Johnson dictum, then all his characters are drawn from life, and you see them as being lifelike. In some ways, they are also, of course, types. So Tarquin is the type of man who will be consumed by lust and who will allow his physical desires to dominate over his good sense, if he has any. Similarly, Collatine is somebody who takes great pride in the honor and beauty of his wife, but who also sees his wife as a possession. And these characters are then seen as flesh and blood people who also have human faults, follies, foibles, and who are ruled on occasion by those faults and follies. Now, there has been criticism that the fact that the poem at some points suddenly goes to a point where you are completely engrossed in the feeling of one character, and then that character is suddenly dumped like that and we move on to somebody else. And this particularly happens with, of course, Tarquin and Lucrece both. That Lucrece's despair after the rape, Tarquin's meditation and his conflict, which we are given an insight into, all of that is given extensive treatment, and then suddenly it changes, the scene changes and something else happens. So this can also be seen as something which is similar to what happens in the drama, that you cannot keep on with one character, but that the scene changes and other characters emerge. And therefore then, because of this problem, characters are not seen as possessing total individuality, and they only have the surface appearance of individuality because you don't really see them developing. They are all kind of monodimensional. The closing of the poem has been criticized because it stops at the moment when they decide to take her body, take it to Rome and display it. We do not see anything after that. So in one sense, we are made to anticipate what will happen, but we are not shown it happening. So we are left unresolved. We know that the father and the husband and all the other nobility, they will of course avenge her, but we do not see that vengeance. So what we are left with is an image of a rape, a very brutal, traumatic rape, and then after that we are given the reactions of the victim, but we are not given the kind of closure which would then have given us catharsis, where we would have seen the villains being punished and we would have seen some kind of closure to the events within the text. There are several themes in the poem which could be tackled at some length. One, of course, is a theme of idolatry, and this is interesting because the depiction of Lucrece is such that she is almost an idol, that you worship her. People worship at the altar of Lucrece. She is perfect in all her ways. She is seen as almost godlike. You are also told about the transience of carnal lust, and this is something that is a strongly echoed theme in the time, that lust lasts only until the possession of the lusted for individual. Once that person has been possessed, the lust itself fades. So lust is not seen as something which can be in any way the foundation of strong relationship. So what Collatine has for his wife, though he describes her in almost idolatrous terms, is supposed to be true love as opposed to what Tarquin has for Lucrece. Then of course there is love and sexuality, and this is explored in serious depth in the case of both Tarquin as well as Lucrece. Lucrece, who does not see sexuality or does not lay any claims to sexuality at all, as opposed to Tarquin, who is all about sexuality. And then, of course, there is a theme of violation, which is a topical theme. It is also something which is dealt with in detail by Shakespeare in several other texts as well. Titus Andronicus, which is written around the same time as the Rape of Lucrece, also deals with the idea of rape and what a raped woman should do with her life, or what her family should do with her. Now, Shakespeare's poem raises a lot of questions about the idea of where does the honor of a family lie and where does the honor and worth of a woman lie. Lucrece herself believes that her worth and her honor are only connected to her sexuality, that only if she is chaste and she is noble and she is untouched by any other man, only then is she worth anything. The fact that she is not voluntarily giving in to the sexual needs of another person but is forced to do so via the act of rape is not important. Chastity is what is important. It is, of course, an extremely patriarchal poem in that sense, because Lucrece believes all that patriarchy has taught, that women's worth is only in their chastity, that they have no other worth at all. And beauty and virtue are important or are valuable only if there is chastity which accompanies them. Otherwise, beauty is worthless, and all that goodness that a woman might have becomes worthless if she becomes a rape victim. So in that sense, it's a very old-fashioned poem. It believes in things which are no longer then considered true or necessary now. But it is also, of course, a patriarchal poem, because the role of the woman is to make her menfolk avenge the wrong that has been done to her. We come to the end of our module on the Rape of Lucrece, and we have considered Shakespeare's poetry, particular attention being paid to the sonnets, but also to the long poem, The Rape of Lucrece. We have looked at the characters and we have summarized the poem, but we have also looked at the idea that women are important only insofar as they are chaste, and that their worth lies in their honor and in their virtue, not necessarily, and that all of that is lost if they are raped. Thank you very much.